At 7:14 a.m. on August 28, 2024, Lars Peterson stood in the cab of a John Deere S790 combine harvester, watching the header cut through spring wheat at 4.8 miles per hour on a section near Minot, North Dakota. 54 years old, fourth-generation wheat farmer, 3,200 acres under management. The yield monitor showed 52 bushels per acre, 10 bushels below his break-even point of 62. His grain bin was already 60% full with wheat testing at 13.2% moisture and 58 pounds per bushel test weight. But the Chicago Board of Trade had spring wheat futures at $5.80 per bushel, down 40 cents from planting. His banknote payment was due September 15th, $127,000. The forecast showed storms rolling in from Canada in 72 hours with potential for hail that could shred standing wheat in minutes. Peterson had 1,100 acres left to cut and maybe 2 days of harvestable weather. Standard practice said, stop cutting, check moisture levels, wait for optimal conditions. His calculator said different. He throttled up to 5.2 miles per hour, accepting higher grain loss to gain speed. North Dakota's spring wheat harvest operates at a scale that feeds America's bakeries. 6 million acres. That's 9,375 square miles of cropland, larger than Massachusetts, dedicated almost entirely to hard red spring wheat, the high-protein variety that makes artisan bread rise, bagels chew properly, and pizza dough stretch without tearing. Every August and September, approximately 360 million bushels must be cut, or threshed, cleaned, and moved through 400 country elevators to rail terminals connecting Minneapolis flour mills, Pacific Northwest export facilities, and Great Lakes shipping routes. The operation happens in a 45-day window determined by when wheat matures and when autumn snow makes harvest impossible. North Dakota's flat terrain enables mile-long combine runs with minimal turning. Individual operators routinely cover 120-plus acres per day, a more than triple the productivity possible in rolling farmland. This is America's breadbasket engine. Industrial grain production at northern latitude extremes, where the 120-day growing season allows one crop annually and weather determines everything. Lars Peterson learned wheat farming from his father, who learned from his grandfather, who homesteaded 160 acres in 1912 when the Great Northern Railway sold land for $8 per acre with 10-year payment terms. His grandfather produced maybe 15 bushels per acre using horse-drawn equipment and threshed wheat with steam-powered separators shared among neighbors. The farm stayed at 160 acres until 1965, when his father bought an adjacent quarter section. By 1985, they'd consolidated to 800 acres. Then came the farm crisis. Land values collapsed, neighbors foreclosed, credit dried up. Peterson's father bought distressed farmland at $400 per acre, leveraging everything. The gamble paid off. By 2005, the operation covered 2,400 acres. Peterson added another 800 acres in 2018, paying $2,800 per acre with borrowed money. Now he farmed a continuous block 5 miles long and 1 mile wide, representing 4 generations of accumulated land, debt, and wheat-growing knowledge refined through cycles of boom and catastrophe. The S790 combine cost $485,000 new in 2019. The machine weighs 35,000 pounds empty, generates 440 horsepower, and processes wheat at rates up to 500 bushels per hour when conditions are optimal. The 40-foot header cuts wheat 18 inches above ground, feeding stalks into a threshing system that beats grain from heads through a rotating cylinder. Airflow and oscillating sieves separate wheat kernels from chaff. The clean grain elevator lifts wheat into a 300-bushel tank. GPS guidance maintains straight lines with centimeter accuracy. Yield monitors create real-time productivity maps. The cab is climate-controlled, pressurized against dust, equipped with satellite radio. Peterson can cut wheat for 12 hours without leaving his seat. He's operating a mobile grain processing factory that he'll use maybe 200 hours annually, and that depreciates $50,000 per year, whether it runs or sits idle. The economics force brutal decisions. At $5.80 per bushel, every acre yielding 52 bushels generates $302 in gross revenue. Seed costs $35 per acre for certified varieties bred for protein content and disease resistance. Fertilizer, primarily nitrogen with phosphorus and potassium, adds $78 per acre. Herbicides for weed control, $42. Fuel and machinery operation, $54. Crop insurance, $28. Land costs, whether cash rent or opportunity cost on owned ground, $85 per acre. Total operating costs, $322 per acre against $302 revenue. Peterson is losing $20 per acre before accounting for equipment depreciation, loan payments, property taxes, or family living expenses. Across 3,200 acres, that's $64,000 in operating losses. Add fixed costs, and the actual loss approaches $180,000 for the year. One bad harvest erases profitability from 3 good ones. The margin between survival and catastrophe isn't measured in bushels. It's measured in whether you can endure losses until yields or prices improve. At 11:30 a.m., Peterson's grain tank alarm chimed. 300 bushels, 18,000 pounds, ready for unload. He radioed Curtis, his hired man running the grain cart. Curtis pulled the 1,000 bushel capacity cart alongside while both machines kept moving. Peterson's unloading auger swung out. Wheat streamed between machines in a golden arc. 4 minutes to empty while covering half a mile. Curtis hauled the grain to a waiting semi-truck at the field edge. The truck would transport 960 bushels, 32,000 pounds, to Peterson's on-farm storage. 4 steel bins with 95,000 bushel combined capacity, and the choreography required constant coordination. One delay rippled through everything. His phone buzzed. Text from his wife, Karen. Elevator called, offering $5.95 for delivery today. That's 15 cents over futures. Peterson calculated instantly. 15 cents times 52 bushels per acre meant $7.80 more per acre. On 2,100 acres already harvested, that's $16,380 in additional revenue. But he'd only cut 2/3 of his crop. Selling now meant forgoing any price rally. If wheat jumped to $6.40 by October, possible if Canadian production disappointed, he'd leave $33,000 on the table by selling early. But $5.95 guaranteed today beats $6.40 hypothetical that might never materialize. Farming was risk management, not profit maximization. He texted back, "Lock in 109,200 bushels at $5.95. The decision hurt. He was selling at prices barely above his production cost. But guaranteed revenue paid the banknote. Speculating on price rallies was how farmers lost farms. When he'd learned that lesson watching neighbors in 2019 hold wheat expecting prices to rise, only to watch them fall to $4.80. They'd lost $78,000 by being greedy instead of prudent. The combine ground forward, mile-long runs across perfectly flat fields, turning only at section roads. North Dakota's glacial till prairie enabled this efficiency. No terraces, no waterways, no obstacles breaking the monotony. Just wheat extending to horizons so distant They curved with Earth's surface. Peterson could see 3 other combines working neighboring sections, small specks crawling across vast expanses. The scale made individual humans irrelevant. What mattered was acres covered, bushels harvested, grain moved to market before weather destroyed everything. At 2:30 p.m., Curtis radioed. "First truck's heading to the elevator. They're running 2 receiving pits. Wait time's about 40 minutes. 40 minutes meant productive time lost. But harvest season stressed every component of the grain handling system simultaneously. When 6 million acres matured within a 10-day window, elevators operated 24/7 and still couldn't keep pace. Peterson accepted the inefficiency. The alternative, storing everything on farm until the rush passed, meant investing in bins he'd use 3 weeks per year. The economics didn't work. So he waited in line like everyone else. By 6:45 p.m., he'd covered 186 acres, and the yield monitor showed average productivity of 53 bushels per acre. 1 bushel better than earlier sections. Maybe the weather had been kinder here. Maybe the soil held more moisture. The variation mattered. Every bushel above break-even was $5.80 he wouldn't lose. He needed to average 180 acres daily to finish before the storms. He was on pace. Barely. His son Brandon called at 7:10 p.m., 26 years old, working as an agronomist for a fertilizer company in Fargo. "Dad, I've been watching the weather. That system looks worse than forecast. They're calling for possible hail Friday morning." "I know. You're not going to finish in time." "Probably not, but I'll get most of it." "What about hiring another combine? Jensen's got his S780 available. At $180 per hour plus fuel, that's $2,500 for a day's work. It's $2,500 versus losing $130,000 in standing wheat to hail damage. Peterson had already done this math, and hail insurance covered catastrophic loss, but included a 20% deductible. On 1,100 uncut acres, a severe hailstorm would cost him approximately $109,000 after insurance. Hiring Jensen for 2 days, $5,000 total, to finish harvest before the storm was rational insurance. But cash flow was already strained. He'd have to pull from the operating line, increasing debt service costs. The decision tree had no good branches, only less bad ones. "I'll call him." Jensen arrived Thursday at 1 p.m. with his Case YH 8250, a massive machine with a 45-foot header. The 2 combines worked in tandem, cutting 85-foot swaths on each pass, processing wheat at combined rates that would clear 420 acres before the forecast storm arrival. By 8:30 p.m., they'd finished 390 acres. Peterson wrote Jensen a check for $2,340. Money well spent, probably. Friday morning brought gray skies and north wind at 18 miles per hour. Temperature dropping. Then the forecast showed hail cells developing along the Canadian border, moving southeast at 22 miles per hour. Peterson started cutting at 6 a.m. despite marginal conditions. The moisture monitor showed wheat at 14.8%, higher than the 13.5% ideal for storage, but acceptable for immediate delivery. He pushed hard, running the combine at maximum sustainable speed, accepting increased grain loss to maximize acres covered. At 11:15 a.m., the first drops hit the windshield. He kept cutting. At 11:52 a.m., he finished the last pass on the final field. Shut down. Done. 3,200 acres harvested in 11 days. Approximately 166,400 bushels at average yield of 52 bushels per acre. Gross revenue at $5.95 per bushel, $990,080. Operating costs, $1,030,400. Net loss before equipment depreciation, $40,320. Add depreciation, loan interest, and property taxes. Total loss of $127,000. But crop insurance would pay $31,000 for yields below his guaranteed 48 bushels per acre on sections that underperformed. Federal subsidy payments, part of the farm safety net, would deliver another $24,000 in December. Actual net loss, $72,000 for the year. He drove the combine back to the shop through rain that fell steadily, sat in the cab for 10 minutes, too exhausted to move. Karen found him there at 1:30 p.m., climbed into the buddy seat. They sat in silence. The harvest was complete, or they'd survived another season. The banknote would get paid. They'd farm again next year. The cycle continued because stopping meant selling to someone who'd consolidate his ground into a larger operation, and 4 generations of accumulated knowledge would become irrelevant. Lars Peterson continued farming through 2027, managing costs, watching markets, hoping for the combination of decent yields and acceptable prices that would generate actual profit instead of managed losses. In spring 2028, Brandon called. He'd been offered a promotion to regional manager, but he'd been thinking about the farm, about whether there was a path forward that didn't require simply enduring. Dad, what if we tried something different? Organic wheat, direct marketing to artisan bakeries, build a brand around North Dakota heritage grains. The margins are better. Peterson listened. Brandon had ideas about regenerative practices, carbon credit programs, value-added processing. Ideas requiring capital, risk, and years to develop. But also ideas that might offer escape from the commodity treadmill where farmers were price takers with no control over their own economic fate. The conversation continued. Nothing was decided, but the possibility existed. North Dakota's 6 million acres of spring wheat continue producing 360 million bushels annually, flowing through 400 country elevators to markets across America and the world, generating $2.1 billion in revenue, supporting 25,000 farm families operating in a climate that offers 120-day growing seasons and winter temperatures that reach 40 below zero. The harvest happens every August, regardless of individual farmer struggles. The wheat feeds bakeries that never think about where flour originates. The system works. Individual farmers endure. The breadbasket engine runs. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us preserve these histories of American agriculture's transformation. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and whether you understand the economics crushing family wheat farms. Thank you for keeping their stories alive.